analyst reports that really help underscore the value that we see Novell presenting from the Novell File Management Suite. Now, I do have a lot of content to kind of go through, so I'm going to move through it relatively quickly. Obviously, make good advantage of using the Q&A window that WebEx provides for us. Ask your question as you go along, and at the end of the session, I'll do my best to make sure we answer all of those questions for you. But really trying to sum up just part of the issue that the Novell File Management Suite is going to is sort of the proverbial iceberg thing, in which we're thinking about, unstructured data inside of your organization. And just to take a quick moment to describe that, and that's basically just the data that your end users produce pretty much on a daily basis and have accumulated over through the many years your organization's been in business. It's basically the data that lives on your file servers, and it's unstructured because there's really very little control that most people have over it, including even the end users themselves. They create the content, they store it out on a file server in some form or fashion, and then they either forget it or they try to keep managing in the data ages. It just really, there's no real good management paradigm normally in place for managing those file-based data on file servers. And what we're showing is about 80% of all the data that's maintained by most organizations is of this unstructured nature. So again, being created by the end users and managed by the end users. Now, there are also some industry reports basically showing that this unstructured data is growing at around 60% per year. Many customers that I've spoken with say they think that may be a conservative estimate. They believe they're almost doubling their storage in many cases. So what we're actually seeing is they're going to increase demand for additional storage resources. And the normal methodology most customers have put in place have been to simply just keep adding more storage. And that works for a while until you start physically running out of space in your data center. And also, it just becomes more to manage than what you can manage in your organization. So what Novell is really trying to do is to introduce some tools and some capabilities to your organization that really help in a number of ways. First is be able to really get an understanding of the data that exists in your organization, and then after you now understand what type of information and data is stored on your file servers, to be able to craft ways to automate that and manage it with a minimal amount of end user and IT staff access. So the system will essentially maintain itself based upon policies that you configured. We can also, again, help identify irrelevant data that may exist inside your organization by reducing your overall storage footprint and allowing you to save additional computing resources. And just making sure we keep this going on a day-to-day basis so that it is not a one-time activity, but it is something that is maintained on an ongoing basis so that you know that your storage systems will remain clean moving forward. We can also craft this product to be able to help you maintain regulatory compliance. So if your organization has regulations, whether they're assigned regulations to your organization or just internal company guidelines, you can craft these policies and make it very easy to be able to report against those to show that you are meeting those guidelines. So the Novell File Management Suite is made up of primarily 3 components. The first is a discovery component, the Novell File Reporter. This particular utility is designed to go out and interrogate your network and just really give you a good understanding of what type of content exists out there and allow you to have just one single console to go through all of the content in your entire network, no matter what type of server that it's stored on, no matter what type of storage array that it may be stored on. Everything is collected back to a central reporting server. And then after you've gained this understanding of what your content you have in your environment, we can move on to the management component, which is the Novell Storage Manager. And this product is really what allows you to start understanding and manipulating the data on disk so that you can optimize your storage environment and make sure that you maintain those regulatory guidelines if appropriate. The final component of the suite is a data reallocation component. This is the Novell Dynamic File Services. And what this piece does is allow you to optimize your actual usage of storage. So once you determine that you have the best data set out there that's available to your end users, they're still based upon the file types or the aging of the data. You might be able to classify this storage in different ways and be able to segregate it on your network so that you can manage that storage in those files based upon their value to the organization rather than simply based upon their location on the storage array. So to go into a little bit more depth into these products and then give you a quick demonstration, what we're going to show here is first the Novell File Reporter. One of the things about File Reporter that helps differentiate it from all the other solutions that are in market today is first, its immense scalability. Again, we did design this product as an enterprise scope, meaning that it is able to gather all of the information from every file server you have in your organization into a centralized collection point. and we can handle immense scalability. We actually designed this product with two primary goals from two of our primary customers that were needing this type of a solution, one of which had a lot of geographic disbursement, meaning that their file servers were scattered all across the country, and they had hundreds of them. And it was just an enormous amount of effort for the IT staff to try to gather reporting data and report it back to their management in a timely fashion. So we designed our product with an agent-based architecture so that we could distribute agents out to every single one of the servers. They do local collection of data, so minimum amount of impact to the file server or the wide area network in that case. They compress the data, and then they transmit it back to a centralized reporting server, and then it remains compressed on that server to minimize the overall disk requirements of the reporting server itself. And then all that information is collected into a central repository so that when management wants to be able to run reports, they get very quick access to those reports because it doesn't have to actually impact touching the actual physical file servers themselves. It runs those reports and actually gives them the information normally in minutes rather than hours or even sometimes days that it takes in normal methods. The other scalability aspect we built is for vast data sets. We have one primary customer that had a data warehousing business, and they literally had petabytes worth of data that they had collected, and they just had very little success in the past of finding tools that could consume such large amounts of data and be able to produce valuable reports back to them in a timely manner. So again, I thought it was crafted to be able to handle both of those types of situations. So it meets the needs of almost every customer that's out there as far as their configuration and their requirements for delivering information back to management. Now, also the other nice thing about our product is, again, we can allow you to schedule reports. So, in the case of these very large data sets, it still may take, several minutes, even an hour to actually run data against that. But that doesn't have to actually impact the end user themselves who's trying to get access to the report, is that you can go ahead and schedule these reports so that when you come into work the next day, the report is sitting there and it's waiting for you, so you can actually start browsing that information without having to run each report individually. Now, the other nice thing is that we also can do ad hoc reports. And these are very important because I'm sure, especially if you're in the IT organization, you probably experienced it at one point in time that someone would come running around the corner and tell you, this individual just got laid off and we need to know every file that they owned in the organization and, what was the activity of this type of data. Or, maybe you get a similar type request coming in from the help desk saying that we're running critically low of storage on this particular primary file server and we need to be able to free up some space quickly. So you can actually go out and start looking for maybe irrelevant data types, multimedia files, other things that have low value to the organization, identify that information and be able to purge it out of your system very quickly in order to keep those primary file servers up and functioning so that the end users can do their job. So again, these are really nice capabilities, and the ability to be able to go report this data can be incredibly valuable to the organization. But probably one of the greatest advantages of a Novell File Reporter is this ability to be able to convert all those findings you get from Novell File Reporter into actionable policies using the Novell Storage Manager tool that we'll be describing in a moment. So once you determine that you have an issue with multimedia files in some cases, it is not your job to manually go out and clean those up. You can now craft a policy through Storage Manager, simply click a button and allow that system to go do that for you. And the really nice thing, as I mentioned earlier, is that not be a one-time activity, but this can be a regularly scheduled activity. So once you've remediated the situation, it will continue to be rectified and cleared up on an ongoing basis by the Novell Storage Manager engine. So what I have here is just a couple of quick screenshots. This is part of just the presentation that I'll be more than happy to provide to anyone else if they're interested after the webinar is concluded. This just shows you that we do graphical-based reports as well as textual-based reports. Graphical are very good for impact. They can be copied into slide decks so that you're able to, again, show a nice visual impact. In this particular demonstration, you can see that little red bar that is kind of out of proportion to the rest of them. In this case, is representing MP3 files in the organization. So, again, it makes it very easy to be able to show, in this particular case, that, this is where the issue we have. We have an inordinate amount of MP3 files in comparison to the rest of the data that's being stored in this particular storage location. And then the textual-based reports provide more in-depth information, and that should be used for additional data analysis as well. So what I'm going to do now is go and tab over, and just to explain what I'm using here, is I do have a VMware environment running at this point in time, but I'm actually doing a demonstration of this technology using Active Directory. The primary reason I've chosen the Active Directory implementation is I can actually do this from a single server demo. I can actually deploy in this case, a Windows Server 2008 system that is running all of the engines, the agents, and the console on a single machine, so it makes it a little bit more efficient for doing the demonstration. If I was doing this from a new directory environment, it would require, which I'd be more than happy to demonstrate to anyone who has interest in that particular area, that you'd actually have to have an OES Linux box, a network server, and another Windows workstation for the administration. So it's a little bit more complicated to demonstrate. So in the essence of time and efficiency, I wanted to go ahead with the simplest demonstration I could show you. Now what I've got here, and hopefully everyone can see this, is the Novell File Reporter console. So again, it's a very simple tool to use. It's made so that it requires minimal to no training whatsoever. This is the primary interface when the system is launched. You're able to have a display of the file servers and shares that are made available from the file servers, as well as some other information like storage alerts. So if you were having disk space limitation issues, these will be flagged here in this particular section. And then you also have a messaging panel, which you can see there's been a few that's been generated by my system here that these are just messages from the engine that come back that are either informational or warning or critical error messages. These particular ones won't affect our demonstration at this point in time. And the final little panel is that if you actually select a server or a scan, you're able to see the information about it. So it basically will pull some demographic information associated with the particular scan you're looking at so that you can see when it was actually ran, as well as when the next scan would run for this particular resource. Now, with that, you can see that we can browse down through, and you actually can see and try to explain the demonstration a little bit for you. In this case, again, it is a single server demo, so you're only seeing, in this case, one server. In your environment, obviously, this would probably not be the case, but you would actually have multiple servers listed under this scan container, and each one of those would have under it what we refer to as a scan. Now, this is a collection of information that's ran by the agent on that particular server, and it is date and timestamp. So you can actually notice in this example that there are 2 Atlanta users, 2 London RDS users, 2 London users, and then 2 support shares that you're seeing. And what this is that you can notice the date and timestamps are slightly different. So that we basically ran 2 scans on each one of the shares off this Windows server at this point in time, so we can use those from a comparative basis. And then you can also notice that you can actually drill down into these. So again, the Atlanta users is essentially a home directory server. You can see the home directory, their profile directories in this case. And there's also a user apps folder here that can be used. So it's kind of a demo structure that we've got set up. Now, from running reports, there's a few different ways you can handle this. You can either select a resource, either starting at the very top of a share or a Novell file server volume, and then you can either click on the reports option to run a report, or you can simply right-click on the scan itself and get the same options for being to run these. You also have the option to remove a scan, so if you have one that's irrelevant in the organization, you can remove it through this interface as well. Once you go in, you can have this option to run many different types of reports. The first one, in fact, more simplistic, is just a summary report. This really just gives you a very high-level overview of the resource in which you've selected. In this case, you don't see a tremendous amount of information, so I'm actually going to drill down one more level to an actually home directory folder and run a summary report. And this can actually be a little bit more beneficial for you to be able to do a quick analysis. This is really helpful for help desk or even IT administrators. Go and look, in this case, having the actual information of the usage of the storage, in this case for the home directory, as well as that really nice graphical chart. So once again, your eye can very quickly catch on and see if any one particular user or group of users are actually consuming more storage than any of the other ones in your organization, and then potentially retrain those users or provision them additional space that may be necessary for their particular business requirements. Now, moving on, we can run some of the other type of reports that actually provide a lot more specific information. We have a few reports like an owner report, which is one that very popular among many of the users. This one, since we're running it against a home directory share at this point in time, it's obviously most of the files that would exist under a user's home directory would be owned by that particular individual. But it really gives you a really nice way of getting a nice look at who is using up the most of the space, in this case, off this particular server. So you get a listing in the preview report to just the basic information and a nice graphical chart to be able to see this. Now, if you actually go back in and we run that same report, but we actually choose the detailed view, you get a lot more information at this point in time. So you can see the textual information, you get the same basic high-level overview. But when you go and start sorting this and you find out which individual is consuming the most amount of space on your home directory server, once you select it, you can actually then go back in and look at the actual files that are under that individual's directory. And once again, we get sorted and determine that maybe they have any particular files that are, out of order. Maybe they're downloading very large imaging files in some cases, or if they, we've seen some cases where they found out that users were actually backing up maybe their laptop devices to their home directory, so they're able to consuming an inordinate amount of additional storage in this case. So again, it allows you to very quickly be able to look at this particular resource and then make some determinations on what needs to be done in order to clarify this situation. Now, a couple other quick reports that you can run. The file name extension was another very useful one. You can come back, and I'm just going to run, in this case, the detail report. And we can see that there are numerous different types of extensions. In this case, in my demo system, we've identified 12 unique extensions that exist. Obviously, since it's a demo system, we don't have a wide variety of files out there. But I've worked with many different customers with this particular product, and I've seen the order of sometimes, hundreds, if not thousands, of additional unique file identifiers that are out in that case. And then make some determination on really, what type of content is being stored. So you can obviously sort this, based upon either the extension or the total amount of size. Now, obviously, in this case, we have some situations set up for us to be able to demonstrate. As you can see, as far as total size, in this case, ADI files are consuming the most of the storage in this case, with 112 files, totaling a whopping 6.85 megabytes in this particular demo. So really useful information that you can get. Now, another nice feature of our product is once you've actually run some of these reports, you have the option of actually storing them inside the system, but since we don't want to have it as a long-term archival process, normally the reports stay about 2 weeks in the system itself. But if you want to do longer-term archival storage of this information, you have the option of saving this report. And we can save it out either as an HTML file, which if there are any graphical components will be included as part of that, or as just a simple commonly limited file that can be used for additional data analysis. In this case, we have 3 options. We have summary report, in which case the summary report is only the top section. So it will give you the extension type, the total size, and the total count. Now, also, just so you're aware, the total count of 112 files with the 6.85 megabytes, that is the summation of all 112 files. So it means that's just a very high-level information. Now, if we move down to the selected item and we select like ADI, we can see that all we're seeing in this bottom panel in this case are just ADI files, no other file type. So if we do a save report on a select item, then that will only save out the ADI in this particular case. So you wouldn't see any of the other file types being displayed. The final option is all items, which would be the bottom portion with all the details, but for every file type that is being displayed in this particular case. So again, that can be used for much greater data analysis. Now, another really nice feature that we have with the solution is the ability to be able to also go in and create filters, because as you may well imagine in your environment, there will be a large amount of data that could be stored out there. So it can become somewhat overwhelming to be able to see these different components. And maybe you're only interested in certain information, either certain file extensions, even being multimedia file types if that's a concern, or specific groups of users, either a specific individual or a group of individuals that can be included, and it would only limit to their resources. Maybe you want to limit this based upon file size. We're not interested in any really small files, or maybe we're not interested in really large files. Maybe they're just, you can set your criteria. And then even sometimes more important is the actual metadata associated with the file. So you're only looking for a particular range of time. We can actually filter on either the file creation date, the file access date, or the file modification date. So you can set any or all of these parameters. And then once you've actually set them, if this is a report that you want to run on a regular basis, you can actually go out and export these filters so that you can actually just really easily import them back in again so you don't have to type this information in over and over again. So I don't think in this particular system, in previous demonstrations they created for it, they actually had a couple of filters in place, but I'll just create one real quick here. So a couple of different file types that I know we have. Inspired ADI and star.mp3. So we'll look at a couple of very popular multimedia file formats in this case. And what we'd actually need to do now is go back and rerun this report. And you see that now we've limited this data back down very quickly so that we can focus in on those particular file types that we're interested in. The other thing that's nice is, again, as I mentioned, is that we can schedule these reports. So once you've gone in and customized this information, you got your filters set the way you would like them to, and in this case, say the detail report, you can simply go back out and schedule that report to run at whatever time you prefer. So I'm just going to bump this one up, and I don't want to do it there. That would take way too long, so I'm just going to give it a couple more minutes. In a few minutes, we'll go out and see this report, and the nice thing is that we'll actually go back out and make certain that it will be available for us to better run at a later point in time and view that report. So the last piece that I'll bring back up again is I want to show, what we've looked at right now is just a single scan. So this is where we can also come back and we can actually do this the aggregation reports, which means we can actually now point to multiple different scans inside the organization. So that instead of looking at just one particular resource, we can look at the entire organizational resources. So in this case, I've actually selected 2 scans of the same share in this particular case. And I do that because that actually allows us to run this other type of report, which we call a comparison report, which can be very useful. In this particular case, nothing has changed. But what it actually would show you is the differences between these 2 snapshots. So that when you ran the first scan report and then you have the second scan that's in place, if any files have been added, deleted, or modified, they would actually be called out. And if there was content in here, when you actually these numbers here would actually be a little small hyperlink, and you can click on those and actually see which files have changed. And again, another use of this I've seen is, again, when a file server is, about to run out of space and you notice, 2 days ago it had plenty of space, so you want to see really what happened. Running this report can maybe identify that, again, an individual user out there has done something out of the ordinary and actually taken up additional space so that you can go identify that user and try to rectify that situation. Again, it's a very useful capability, I believe. You can also, instead of just running, again, this type of report, we can come back in and we could actually have, 2 different resources in this case, so the Atlanta users and the London users, in which case we can come back out and we could run something like a file modification date aging report, which is, again, a very useful report as well. So I'm going to come back out and run real quickly a detailed report. And you can see in this case we have a wide variety. We actually did a pretty good job in setting this demo up to show a wide variety of dates out there. So we have files that have aged back to as far as the year 2000, and in this particular case, files as new as 2009 from this particular data set. Now, obviously, you can imagine your organization would have a wide variety, and I've been working with many customers in which they would have files sometimes dating back into the 70s, in some cases with the original timestamps that were associated with them. Other ones would actually have files that were, even into the future, where they've actually identified that applications were saving dates in the incorrect format, in the European format rather than U.S. format, so they actually were able to correct some situations inside their organization. So again, real good information. It allows you to make determinations, based upon, if you have a lot of aging files in your organization, it might be much better to be able to have some alternative storage resource for those old files that are still valuable to the organization, but not being used on a regular basis, so they can actually be stored on a lower cost storage mechanism. Now, for that, I want to wrap up the Novell file reported portion of the demonstration and jump back into the slide deck real quick here. And we're going to move on to the Novell Storage Manager. So now that you've actually understood what type of data you got in your organization from Novell File Reporter, you can then begin to try to craft policies to be able to manage that data in an automated fashion and minimize the overhead on your IT organization. So some of the primary capabilities of Novell Storage Manager are the ability to provision and deprovision storage resources. Now, this means simply the creation of directory structures. And this is a really nice and great capability, but many of you are probably well aware, obviously, the Novell directory through this Console One creation utility can actually create a user's home directory during the user creation process. And again, it's still a very manual task. And this product, Novell Storage Manager, ties in very nicely if you have some sort of an identity management strategy, either using Novell Identity Manager or any other third-party product, which may allow the creation of users from an external source like your HR system. But whichever way your users get created, Novell Storage Manager will detect that user creation event, and then it will actually go and provision out not only home directory storage for those individuals, but also departmental or auxiliary storage areas that we'll be discussing in a few moments. So it's a full-featured provisioning product. But the provisioning aspect is one that normally most organizations have pretty well worked out. If you hire a new user, chances are, if they don't get a home directory or access to the departmental share, they're going to contact someone, most likely the help desk, and request that information. But there's also additional provisioning requests that we can kick off that actually are not a user creation event. So when individuals' role changes in the organization, they're either added to groups in order to get additional privileges, or if they may even just change their location inside the organization, moving from one department to the other or one geographic location to the other, we can detect those events and also kick off additional provisioning activities associated with those. But once we've got all the provisioning activities handled, the one aspect that most organizations don't do as good of a job is the deprovisioning. So that, whenever a user is participating in a project and he gets assigned access to storage associated with that project, and then later on he moves off the project on to other activities or changes from one department to the other, most likely that user never calls back into the help desk saying, I can still see all those old files. I need someone to go in and clean all that up for me so that I don't have too much permission. Virtually never happens. The nice thing about Novell Storage Manager is, again, we detect these activities happening inside the directory services, either Microsoft Active Directory or Novell directory, and then once we detect it happening, we look at the policies associated, and we determine this individual moved from the accounting over into marketing. We no longer need access to any of those accounting departmental shares, and instantaneously we remove that information so that, again, this organization is now nice and secure, and this particular individual who may have, changed roles no longer has access to content that he no longer should. We can also handle the reallocation of the data as well. So maybe this individual moved from, in this case in our demo system, from the Atlanta office to the London office. We want to be able to actually move all of his home directory or particular departmental share information over to his new location. So this can actually be happened simply by the move event from either eDirectory or Active Directory. So once you restructure that user, Storage Manager will detect it, and then based upon a schedule that's defined inside the policy, it will kick off a data migration. Now, maybe the actual change happens on a Thursday or a Friday, but you decide that you don't want to actually start the data reallocation happening to maybe Saturday morning, so that all your Friday backups will conclude. And then it will kick off that data migration automatically, moving that data across to the designated resource in the new policy, and they'll automatically handle all that so that, again, it's completely a hands-off process from an IT perspective. It's also really very useful if you just restructure your organization. I'm sure you've all had some experience with this, that your organizational structure changes, and maybe that's going to require you to move data around on disk, either through an acquisition or a merger type operation or just standard organizational restructuring. The really nice thing is that you can automate all of that through Novell Storage Manager, simply going out and changing the profile paths inside the policies, and then you just simply kick the policy off and force it to run again. And that way you're actually managing directory structures that are already in existence. They've been in existence for many years, but it will handle that restructuring all that data automatically for you so that, again, it's not a manual task for your IT organization. Other aspects of the solution are load balancing and grooming. Load balancing can be quite useful, especially if you have a group of home directory servers. It's probably the most applicable example, in which you may have 3, 4, 5 servers that service up home directories. And if you notice that any one or two of them may have become overburdened in comparison to the other ones, and you would like to make sure you restructure this data across these other servers, we can actually do this through an automated process installing a storage manager. We can either restructure this data and load balance either based upon the percentage of free disk space on the targeted resources or the actual free space. So there's a few different algorithms that we can use. And you just simply push a button, go away for the weekend, come back, and now you come back, and all of your servers have essentially the same amount of data stored on them and appropriately the same amount of usage being required of them. Now, the grooming operation is actually probably more useful from any IT perspective, and this allows you to simply go out and harvest data from your existing storage resources. So we've been talking a lot about multimedia files, so it's a great example. And maybe you're having an issue where you're running out of space in your storage area networks, and you're looking at having to make a very large purchase of additional storage area resources. But before you want to do that, you want to make sure that there's no additional information that you can clean up or work against. So multimedia files may be one of those nicely, easy targeted file resources. You can actually go out and, again, collect the information from Novell File Reporter so you can articulate it to management that we do have a massive amount of irrelevant file types stored in our organization. And we can go through and actually kick off a grooming process to go look for those specific file types and either delete them, which is a very difficult approach, especially since you would lose access to that content, but more applicably, restructure them and move them from their current location to another designated resource. Now, this could be a lower-end storage area network resource, or just another location somewhere else inside the organization, either on local disk or any other kind of attached storage infrastructure. So again, it allows you to be able to go and harvest this data and pull it back in, but still be able to manage it, again, with minimal to no IT organization oversight. So again, that harvesting process is called vaulting. That's what we refer to it inside the product, as well as that ability to delete the content. Now, the other aspect, again, that we really need to focus in on for all of our products is tie back into the identity infrastructure of your organization. So obviously you have file systems that exist in your organization, whether they be Microsoft or Novell. You have those associated directory services for those particular products that are used for managing access to those resources. Really what, again, Novell Storage Manager does that's unique in the industry is the ability to be able to tie these two sets together, that you can detect events occurring in that appropriate directory service and apply them to an appropriate policy and interact and manipulate and manage those particular file systems. Now, this is the life cycle that we refer to as the overall management of a storage resource. So you can see in this case we've included the ability that, if you're tying back into a larger identity management solution that's available to your organization, in this case the HR organization is tied back in, then when a user is created in your HR system and has been flagged as being hired, then that HR system, through whatever type of identity management solution you might have it deployed, would actually create that user in the appropriate location in either Microsoft Active Directory or Novell eDirectory. Once that event occurs, Novell Storage Manager would detect that and actually go out and provision the proper user and collaborative storage. And from a Novell Storage Manager perspective, collaborative storage is, you can think of as departmental shares for the most part. So any other location those users would have access, and multiple users would have access to this content. Now we can actually provision this based upon any type of role. So not only will we just provision them again the particular home directory, but again, if they're in a specific container, either in eDirectory or Active Directory, or if they're members of certain specific groups, we can actually understand that information from the directory services and create access to all of those appropriate storage resources to that particular individual. You can actually manage all these different the paths that are available. So again, this is more appropriate again from a Microsoft perspective, in which you actually have profile paths. Maybe many of you are familiar with those, that you have a profile path that actually will determine how your Windows desktop is configured. So maybe you store that under your home directory or some other kind of a collaborative storage resource. Is that we can actually manage that so that we set that information part of the policy, so that when a user gets, associated with a particular policy, it automatically would push those values back down to their Windows desktop, so that they will pull their policy from the appropriate location and allow you to be able to manage that. We also differentiate between standard desktop policies as well as terminal services policies. So many organizations, again, have to have a slightly different configuration based upon whether you're coming in from a physical desktop or a shared terminal services type emulation. So we actually specify both that information separately, so that we detect the connection type and can actually push the appropriate Windows desktop policy and profile over to that particular workstation for that end user. We can manage and set file rights so that we can go back in, and can be very useful. You can go ahead and look at your structure on your system and look at all the files and folders that are stored out there, and help you understand what are the permission sets or the trustees that are assigned. And then if they're out of line with what the organizational standard should be, you can actually use this product to actually rectify that. Now, from a Novell perspective, there are a lot of important rights and capabilities that you could associate. Things like delete inhibit or rename inhibit. Maybe organizational policy is that you set those for some of your departmental shares. So if it's not been consistent, you can use this tool to go out and retroactively, with just a simple click of the button, go back and reapply those norms back out to your entire file system with, again, minimal IT overhead. Managing quotas. Many organizations really want to be able to assign and manage quotas, but they don't want the overhead of this, because again, sometimes the quota management utilities themselves are very restrictive, either requiring a very high level administrative privilege to the network, or are very end user, not accessible to the end user. So they have to run specific tools in order to be able to run that, and you wouldn't really want your standard end user to have access to those resources. So a really nice feature that Novell Storage Manager also includes is a quota management component. What this allows you to do is actually go out and, associated with the policy for a group of users, is designate a specific individual or group of individuals that can actually manage the quota for those groups. You can actually go and be able to, and has a really nice web interface that they can actually utilize, so that, in this case, you could actually even have a departmental manager, someone who's not in the IT organization whatsoever, to manage the quota for the users that are assigned to him. And again, because it's based upon either a container or a group, then that could actually be very dynamic. So the individuals either added or removed from a specific container in the directory service, or added or removed from a group, this individual, this departmental manager, automatically would get right to better manage their quota with no additional IT overhead being required. And in addition, there are actually some really nice tools as part of this, where they can actually scan the file system. So if someone's got a quota, they can actually look and be able to see, are they using any additional data types that, again, are relevant to the organization. We manage the renames, and this is most applicably, you start thinking about a woman getting married. It's probably the most common example, which her last name would change. And oftentimes you want that to be changed across the entire system. So sometimes it's just changed from a vanity perspective. You go in directory service and you just change the last name field, but you don't rename the user account. And sometimes the user account gets renamed, but then that may have issues with whether their home directory or any other type of resources get changed. And specifically from a Microsoft perspective, you got to make sure you go back and change all those profile paths so that they're all pointing to the right location, especially if you rename those directories. Novell Storage Manager handles all of that for you. You just simply go in and perform a very simple operation that I'll try to demonstrate in a few moments in Active Directory, where you just simply go in and rename the user object. And at that point in time, you're done. It will actually go and handle renaming every other resource out there for you, including the file system and, from a Microsoft perspective, all those policy paths. The automate the transfer and move, we already discussed this. You know, again, we'll automatically restructure the data on disk based upon your allocation inside of the directory service. Managing the profile properly, we discussed. The file grooming, we discussed. Then the final piece of this is actually the archival maintenance of your data. So associated with the user, you know, we manage that user's file storage over their life cycle with the organization. Once they leave the organization, whether either through an inactivity, they're going on some sort of a leave of absence of some sort, or whether they're terminated or resign their position, we can actually make determinations what's happened. And really nice things that we can do is that we can automatically, you know, go through and move their storage. So their home directory or any departmental shares, that once an individual is terminated, they'll actually remove that storage from your primary location and put it into a secondary location, and then be able to allow the the departmental manager or the HR department to go in and be able to scan that data, so they automatically get additional rights to be able to see a user's home directory, where historically they would not be able to when the user is active in the system, scan that content for anything inappropriate or you know, relevant data that they want to harvest back out of that user's home directory. And after a period of time, the system will automatically delete that. So you're not maintaining those home directories for years, consuming additional storage for content that is completely irrelevant to the organization. So really nice functionality included with Novell Storage Manager. So with that, I'm going to now jump back over to my demonstration system, and I've got to log back into Storage Manager because I'll get timed out on me. So I will bring up the console. So now what you're seeing is the console itself looks very similar to the console we showed you in Novell File Reporter. One of the primary differences is the console in this particular case is going to be seldom used. And it would normally be only for administrators in this case. And really all you're doing is going back in and creating policies. So if any of you are familiar with the Novell ZenWorks suite of products and have utilized that in your job function, the concept of a policy is very similar in this case. It's a collection of different resources, and I will go show you one that's in creation right now from Atlanta perspective. We have a policy and we have numerous attributes associated with it. We have the association, so in this case it's only associated to a single container in Novell, Microsoft Active Directory in this case. But we do allow you to associate it, you know, with groups and users if you choose to. So you can actually have these exception policies associated only with users. So again, very easy to make that association. You can also have what we call auxiliary policies. This allows you to have a lot of complexity in the way you create your policies. If you were to have these primary policies that will be created to handle, in this case, home directory creation and management, but then you can create these auxiliary policies you associate with this one, so that once the user made you know, a member of a single policy, it actually will automatically flow down through, and you know, you can make the overall management of the policy much easier. A provisioning option, and this is what you see in the case of Microsoft Active Directory. We can assign the different rights and attributes. We can also override, from a Microsoft Active Directory perspective, the owner of the primary folders that we create as part of this product. Now, you may ask, why do you want to do that? But if you're familiar with Microsoft and the way in which they manage their file system, if you are the owner of a file or a folder, there are certain rights and permissions that are assigned to you that you're unable to block from an administrative standpoint, one of which is the ability to delete something. So if you created a user home directory and that user is the owner of their home directory, then technically they can go out and delete their own home directory. Now, most users wouldn't want to do this, but we all know that it sometimes happens accidentally. So we've actually created this nice little feature so we can actually go override, in this case, the user's primary home directory. So just the actual user directory itself would be overwritten, and a different individual in this case would be assigned. So it can be either a user or a group or just some kind of a service account you'd want to create. And what that would do is prevent the user from deleting their primary home directory. But any files and folders created below that structure would have the proper ownership based upon the end user themselves creating that information. We can also provision content. I'll try to show this in just a moment as well. So instead of just creating the basic folder structure, we actually can create additional substructures under the primary path, and then even populate those with additional data types. One of the examples you'll see in a few moments is like an expense report. We want to make sure everyone has access to the latest expense reports. We put it in their home directory, and then later on, if it ever gets changed, you can actually update that and push it back out to those home directories again. And then final option is to be able to specify the map drive path in the case of Microsoft Active Directory that will be used for their profile home directory path. So you'll see that in just a moment as well. The final little piece here is the path. In this case, we only have a single path designated, so we actually can come back in and we'll be able to say, in this case, if we again, the naming conventions wouldn't be entirely appropriate in this case, but let's say we had multiple home directory servers in this case. We can come back in and we can simply add that path. And now we have, in this case, multiple different resources. Once we have those multiple resources, this is where we can actually do that distribution, which by default is random, which means that we just simply pick a server and create the user's home directory. We can either use actual free space or percentage free space if we choose to, so that it will make sure it creates those directories in the appropriate location. Quota management, as we showed you here, the other nice thing about quota management is that we can actually assign an initial quota, which most basic products allow you to do that initial quota. But we also set a maximum quota if you choose to. So that means that you won't allow the departmental administrator in this case to actually go out and just keep assigning more and more storage. You say that in this case, the minimum would be 100 meg, the maximum is 1 gig. We don't want anyone to have more than 1 gig in their home directory. You also can determine, if you choose to, what value to increment it. In this case, we're only doing 5 meg, but maybe that's too small, so we'll actually up that to the 50 meg in this particular case, so that we're able to make sure that this will be appropriate in this case. The quota options here are in place, and then we have that move schedule, so that we can actually see, that we can understand when the data can be moved. And then finally, the cleanup options. And we discussed this a few moments ago when we showed that life cycle. So whenever data becomes irrelevant, it actually gets moved out, and you can determine that you're enabling the deletion of a user home directory. Then you determine what kind of a delay you want to associate that with that. And in this case, 7 days. It could be whatever you choose to. If you put it at 0, it actually will delete it immediately. So that's normally not set remote. And then you have this option to vault on cleanup. This means that after the user is terminated, let's put their data somewhere else. Take it away from the standard home directory server and put it into this other location. Now, that very nature of vaulting the data could automatically give additional groups, permission based upon where it's actually vaulted under, such as the HR department in this case. The vaulting rules allow you to go and do other operations. So in this case, we actually have some cleanup where we can delete temporary files. So before we vault any data, let's just clean it up first. So there may be irrelevant data. In this case, known temp files that are completely irrelevant. We don't have to ask anyone about that. We'll just delete that data so that when we vault it, we're not storing everything, but only the information that could have some usefulness. Then finally, the grooming rules. In this case, this is a policy we can kick off. Again, we're using video files in this particular example, so that we can actually filter those back out again as well. And I was afraid of this. I have a issue occasionally because I did not go through and activate my Windows server, so I apologize about that. I just realized that just a few months ago, and Windows Server 2008 doesn't really like it if it's not been activated, and it won't stay up and running for very long. So I have a quick fix for this. Since we made a snapshot of the system in an up and running state here, so we'll just take a brief moment, and I will use this as a moment to try to see if I can go through here and look at any of the questions, if there's any question and answers that may be going on. I see there's a few of them out there. So one of them, you said there's a question out there saying that Novell doesn't support eDirectory as good as it supports Active Directory. I'd be interested in maybe a little more information about that because, again, Novell Storage Manager originally was only an eDirectory product. They added Active Directory based upon, the request, and actually we found out in many cases that it's more necessary in a Microsoft environment because there are less tools provided by the vendor to actually do some of this management. So we specifically included Active Directory in this case. And again, the reason I'm demonstrating Active Directory is because, again, it's a simpler demonstration as a single box demo rather than a multi-box demo. But obviously, all the feature functionality that we've discussed at this point is equally available in obviously Novell eDirectory to manage your OES Linux or any network servers you may still have in your environment. But equally, that it works as well in a cross-platform environment using the Microsoft environment servers. Let me see if I've got my system back up yet. Come on. There we go. So I'm going to have to log back into the product here, but I basically showed you the policy, so I'm actually not going to go back into the actual management console again at this point. What I'll actually do is I will go to look at the file system. It'll take just a moment as it comes back and populates everything. It's some of the data is not already cached. And I'm going to open up the tool. So I'll just real quickly go through here and show you, again, the file system. What you're looking at here under the actual computer icon is all the physical disks. So essentially we don't have any mapped drives at this point in time. These would appear from the file server perspective to be disks that are physically attached to the server. That'll become important in just a moment. Now, so looking at the Atlanta, what we can see under here is we have Atlanta users. Then we have that home directory that we showed a few moments ago. And here's where we can actually see some of the different content that's being stored out there. What I'll also do is go back into Atlanta, and remember we had that policy associated with the employees container. So you can tell, and again, for the simplicity here, I'm going to go ahead and create myself an account. I'm just going to create one for Greg White, and I'm going to make the username here all caps, and that's for a reason, because it makes it a little bit easier to see. And then I'm going to go put the password in. And this, I can type in anything. So, and what it takes just a few moments is, again, what happens is this event is detected, and then after we detect the event, it actually will kick off a process through Novell Storage Manager. So in real time, it's actually very, very quick, but as things happen, you know, the time expansion principle, whenever you do any kind of a demonstration, is seconds turn into minutes and minutes turn into hours, at least from a perception basis. But we'll do it just a minute here, and the system has never failed me yet. So after a few moments, what will happen is you will actually see that directory structure get created for us, and it actually will get populated with the additional content that exists. So one thing I'll show you in the meantime, oh, there it went, I just saw it happen. So you can see that it now has created the GWhite directory. And what I'll do is I'll show you that, you know, I'm going to show you the template directory while we were waiting, but since it already created, I'll show it straight from here. Is that not only did it create my home directory for me in this case, but it also pre-populated information from that template. So we have a welcome letter that came in, and then also the Atlanta file. So this is where we have company policies, expense forms, and HR forms. It may be specific to a geographic area or department or different portions of the organization. So again, we can make determinations based upon the policy as to what type of information gets pre-populated into in this case, the home directories. So again, that was a very simple procedure. I'm going to move through the demonstration quite quickly here, so I apologize that I want to touch base on a few of the aspects of it that are unique. Now, one thing I want to show you, if I go back here and look under, and again, Microsoft Active Directory, so this is a critical factor for many organizations, is under this profile path, we set it to H, and you can see here that we've gone through and, you know, created the proper path in this particular case for this individual. Now, I'm going to do a rename of my user object here real quick so we can show that change. And again, it's very simple. Again, we're just using the Microsoft Management Console in this particular case, and I'm just going to say I changed my name to Greg Black in this case. And then I'll go through, and this is again just a portion that's, you know, mandated and created by the Microsoft Management Console. So this is not a useful tool, or you're not using a Novell storage tool in this case. So this is the same operation you had to perform, and this could be automated through an identity management procedure as well. But once we've gone through and created this change, that's all we have to do. So we made the change in Microsoft Active Directory. And again, if we come back and we wait and we stay nice and patient, what will happen is that the change will be detected, and you can already see it's happened over here. So this is a very quick process that went through, and we've now renamed the actual home directory value itself. But then also, if you remember, we didn't go back in and touch that profile, but now it's actually gone back out, and you can see if we can get down here, it is changed it over here as well. So that when the user reconnects in this case, it automatically will be able to map that home directory to the right location without, you know, disrupting the user's access. The final piece that I'll show here real quickly is the moving of that user. So I'm actually going to go here to the Microsoft Management Console, do a very simple procedure here where I'm going to click off the move. I'm going to come back under an FMS, London Employees, say OK. So the user is now moved from here. Now, once again, this is one that you keep your eyes peeled to be able to see the demonstration work properly. But you can see that obviously the account still exists over here in the Atlanta users. If I come down to London real quick, and under London users, home, and you can actually see when you jump back, we see the FS move. This is actually showing that we actually renamed the directory to show that a move is in process at the moment. We should also be able to see that we actually have the GBlack directory. So it's already created over here in the London side. We still have it in the Atlanta side as well because it's in the process of a move. Once the move completes and it's verified that all the data has been put into the new location, it will then come back in and clean up those other additional resources. So you won't have the data stored in two different locations. So this is a move process. And then you'll also notice now that we came over and we've had, this is an example of that additional provisioning activity. So we kept all the other information because I may have had some very useful information in my Atlanta files, but now I actually get a welcome to London. So I'm in a new country, new customs, new procedures, so I get a new welcome letter coming back in, as well as I get additional files. So same basic structure, but maybe different company policies, The expense reports would obviously be different, so they'll be in British pounds rather than US dollars. So again, just an example of how we can use that. The final display I will have here for you, and we'll go to the London component, at least this section here, is we do the deletion. So I'm actually going to delete the end user now. And once again, and as you would most likely expect, we come back over here to the file system, and we're looking here at London users. After just a few moments, so we'll actually have that kickoff. And let me close up this other one so we won't have quite as much clutter going on. But we actually do have this, I believe it's under the vault, the user vault, the London, I believe this is where it's going to put it. Sometimes make some changes for it. But once it actually kicks off that policy, which again may take just a few moments, what it actually would do is, in this case, is set up to move that data from the home directory server to the centralized resource that's accessible back, in this case, theoretically from the corporate facility rather than the remote office, back to a centralized resource that can be scanned and be able to be managed by the rest of the organization. And actually, I remember why it's not kicking off now, because we actually have a deferred, well, actually, it should do the data reallocation. It wouldn't do the deletion of it. So we'll just give this just another few moments here to go through and process. While that's actually doing its thing, I'm actually going to launch and do one other capability. So what we've been discussing to this point is managing user home directory. Probably the easiest concept from the collaborative storage is to think about it from a project basis. So that's what we've actually shown here in this particular resource, is that we have this group. Under the groups, we actually have projects, in which case we got, in this case, appropriate enough from our previous discussion of CRM project. So what we're going to actually do now is go and create a new group, and I'm going to call it the FMS rollout, because you just purchased this incredibly important product for your organization, and you're going to use it to be able to help manage the rollout across your organization. So I'm just specifically going to create this group called FMS Rollout, and it's under the Atlanta section, so we got to go back up under here under Atlanta. And I'm going to close out the home directory. And what we should see here is the collaborative storage section that we built out, and under that's projects. And you can see that it's already created this projects container for it. So very similar to what we saw the home directory, it creates a structure for us. But in addition, you can see if we go look at the properties real quick here under security, that you have to trust me to look through all of this, but there is no actual individual users been assigned rights to it at this point. We just simply created a structure at this point. So what we can do is come back over to the FMS rollout, and using the Microsoft Management Console, we're going to go in under the management capability, and I'm going to put in, it should be Amelia Taft. I'm going to make her the manager of this group. Now, that's also going to apply that she's the project manager of our business process. But one thing that actually will happen, and it may take just a moment to kick back off again, but we'll actually see by simply making her the manager of the group, it will roll back out again, and she'll actually get the management rights here to this particular directory structure, so that she'll be able to manage any and every folder under that. Now, while we're waiting on this, and I'll come back and show you that, we can look at the project team. We can notice that there's also no team members at this point. So this is actually a little easier done by going back over to the employee container, selecting a group of users, and we're just going to say add them to group. Let's say FMS. Roll out and say OK. So now the other people are actually added into that group. And what you'll start seeing in just a moment here is, again, once we take to this event process, we're actually going here, now we're actually creating these individual users, their personal directories in this project folder, so that they actually have their own location. Now, everyone in the project team has read-only rights to everyone else's directory, but they only have specific permissions of their own. So if I click back over here like at C. Daniels and go back and look under security, you'll see that he has full control, basically everything except full control of their own particular directory. But an individual like Amelia Taft, which hopefully she's got her properties assigned by now back over here, she would actually, you see that it has gone back and assigned her as the having almost full control at the top level, and then that would flow down across. So again, it's a really nice way in which to be able to go out and manage collaborative storage. Now, this can happen in an e-directory perspective, either whether a user is under a particular container or organizational unit or a member of a group. Because the container cannot be a security equivalent in Microsoft Active Directory, it is only be able to use under a group membership with Active Directory. There's one case in which there is a slight difference between eDirectory and Active Directory based upon the functionality of that directory service. Now I'm going to jump back over real quickly here to my slideshow and move into the last section of the demonstration here, which is the Novell Dynamic File Services. And again, this is a continuing the trend of a policy-based utility, but mainly for data reallocation. And we've shown a couple of examples of this, basically in that grooming and the vaulting procedure that we discussed around Novell Storage Manager, where it will actually harvest data and reallocate it. But the one aspect that Novell Storage Manager does not do, that Novell Dynamic File Services does, is the ability to allow the end user to continue to have access to those resources without any impact on their normal business process. So as we discussed a little bit earlier, if we use Novell Storage Manager to go harvest multimedia files, we essentially would take them out of the user's home directories in this case and put them into a separate location of which the user may only have read-only access. Now, it may be a different drive mapping, so it will be a change of access for that particular user. And in the case of irrelevant files, that may not impact your business. But maybe there's another scenario. Maybe your organization has a very high utilization of spreadsheets, and they're very critical to your organization, or potentially Microsoft Access databases or some other kind of file type that is very important to you. So you want to actually elevate those specific file types to a higher priority in your organization. But you obviously want to make sure the user can get easy access to those file types and they're where they expect them to be. So really what we can come back and do with the Novell Dynamic File Service is we allow you to go and take that data, which on the left-hand side is sort of just a virtual view of your storage resources, and be able to separate it into two physical locations. So in the case of the Novell file server, that would be two separate Novell volumes. In the case of the Windows box, it would be two separate shares. And then the magic is that we join those two back together again through basically a merger process in memory on the file server, so that the end user sees that content and is able to continue to get access to it without being able to affect their organization. So I'll demonstrate that in just a moment. The other concept we discussed here is also on the aging of data. Again, this actually could apply to almost any organization. As we discussed earlier, there may be large amounts of content that is beyond a 2 or 3 year aging parameter, specifically from a modification date. So this data, again, still may have value. You may be required by law or organizational policy to keep this data for 5, 7, 10 years, whatever the requirement would be. But do you have to treat this data the same as you do everything else, since it's not active data sources? So this is another use case for dynamic file services, in which we'll create a policy based upon this age, and we'll go and take our active data, let's say in this case anything that's been modified in the last year, and we'll actually take that on a single volume or Microsoft share, and then everything else will go to a separate physical resource. Now, one of the ways we can do this with this aging paradigm is we can actually concentrate our backup and restoration services on that active volume, because we know that that the stale data has not been modified, so there's really no intent to even back that up, or you can actually make the backup routines much more less of a priority to the organization, thereby completing your priority backups first, and then the secondary backups will conclude at their leisure. Now, this is kind of helping you understand a little bit about the way things look. So now that we've used our policy to physically separate data on disk, what we're actually showing here is the concept of a pair that I'll be showing you in the utility in a few moments. So all we're simply doing is taking two different file paths. In this case, the C: primary file path and the F: secondary, which could be a UNC path as well, file path. So these are two separate physical file paths on disk that if you were coming in from the file server perspective, you would see these being separated. But they have a very, this type of a structure to them. In this case, we're looking at managing music, documents, and projects. And we may say that these music files are the ones in which we consider to be somewhat irrelevant. So we're moving them to this secondary pair. Now, in this view, what we're showing over here on the left-hand side is that same view of that information physical on disk. So when you come in and you map a drive to the primary location, so in this case, we'll be mapping the drive to this C: primary location. When we come in and look at it, we see as if all of that data from those two separate physical locations exists in a single location. So this means it allows you to physically separate that data on disk so that as an IT organization, you can manage that data differently, and your tools are completely unaware of it. So there are no pointer files, there are no link files. It's just a standard, very classical file system implementation. And the way we do our magic is that we simply read the file allocation tables and directory tables off those two locations, merge them in memory, and then hand them to the user as if they were just coming from a single location. So it's a very elegant approach in the way in which we handle it. It makes it very easy to manage these resources. So with that, I'm going to do jump back over to a quick demonstration. I'm going to go back in here. I'm going to launch the tool so that you can actually see the administrative component of this as well. I'm going to click over here and say connect. I'll give you this tool. I'm going to bring back up the file system. And this is really when it becomes more important that you understand that what we're seeing under the computer representation here are essentially the physical disk. So that's the way it's being presented. And if you can tell over here, if you're familiar with VMware, you can see all these little icons over here representing that we presented these disks to the operating system as if they're a separate physical drives. And we can see we have London and Atlanta, and our policies are set up around London, and specifically under London users, home, be Davenport. We can see, and actually I had to do this because it's I made my snapshot. I didn't go and revert this, so I'm actually I won't close their eyes for a moment, but I'm going to come back over here, take my reallocated data, I'm going to stick it back over here, and then I'm going to just tell it to put it back. And my previous demo wouldn't actually that was actually a copy process. I don't want to copy. I want to do a move process. And I'll just go ahead and delete all this information. It'll be easier. All right, and from the London, I'm actually going to delete the home directory component here as well. So what I've actually got now, if I go back here and I look in B Davenport, what we should actually see is there are some, MP3 files that are in place. One of the other users is Kay Calloway, has a music folder which has some music in it as well. So what we're going to be looking at is a physical disk, and you can think of this as being the physical disk that is your home directory server in this case. Now what we've also had created is this secondary location, which this could be a direct attached storage to the physical box, meaning an internal disk drive, a SCSI attached drive, or it could be a storage area network attachment. We really don't care. It could even be iSCSI. We don't care how you present its data, but the physical file server will believe that it has access to this other resource. It could be a share of another server. So if you want to do that as well, so that you could simply do a map drive from the server perspective over to the other resource. In the case of like an OES Linux, that could be a mount point. So you could actually mount another resource from another physical server as well. How you expose the data doesn't matter as long as the operating system that is hosting the primary data store can see that secondary data store. And since I've done my cleanup procedure here, you can see that there's no data over in this section. And I've already shown you how under the London users there is data. Now the one other piece that I need to click off real quick here, and because I don't want to mess up my typing, I'm going to have a little quick cheating procedure here. I'm going to go back into the employees container under container here. Take the right one. I'm going to do the Kathy Calloway properties profile. I'm just simply going to copy this UNC path in this case here so that I can use it for my map drive activity in just a moment. But what I'm going to come back and do is let's go back over to the utility. I'm simply going to come back under the pair, and what we have is this pair for the London users. And what I'll show you in this case, if we go look at the properties of the pair, just to show you, is we have the L drive London users, which if I click over here, let me bring that out a little bit, you can see it. So we have the L drive London users, which we see right here. So L drive London users. We then have our secondary configured as the W drive London users. So basically, all it's going to do is it's going to associate those two with each other. Now that we have that pair association in place, we've created a policy. We have two of them in this case. One I'm going to run is the audio policy. All it is going to tell it to move it from the primary, the L drive, to the secondary, the W drive. And then we specified under file types audio. So we can see we have this audio application document, these basic file types. You can also do it just based on a file pattern if you choose to, modified access or file size date. So these are the criteria that you can put in place with dynamic file services. So now that we've explored that information, I'm simply going to click over here and I'm going to tell it to do an execute now on audio. Jump back over real quickly here to the file system. And what you should be able to see in just a moment here is it's already went out and created. So it's a very fast process. So I'm looking again at the W drive under the London users, and we see this B Davenport. You remember I showed you had a few MP3 files under there. So now they're in this new location, the secondary storage. It's Kathy Calloway. She had, this music folder which had some data in it, and there's all those music files. And if we go look at Sue Griffin, here's her music files. Now, if we come back to this L drive, the physical, what used to be the primary home directory server, go under the home directory attribute, look at B Davenport, you'll notice that there are no longer any MP3 files here. We physically moved them from the primary path of the home directory server to the secondary path location. Now, without dynamic file services, this user would be impacted. So they would actually see through their drive mapping. So in this case, let's go back in and we're going to click off and perform a drive mapping here. And I'm going to do it for the other user in this case here, map a network drive. So I'm going to say it's the H drive. And of course, I fingered something, so let me go back and map a network drive, H drive, there we go. I'm going to type in that path so you can see that this is the UNC path to that K Callaway. I'm going to connect it to the H drive. So I'll come back over here and show you again. We have under the L drive, we'll go back and look at the Callaway at this point in time, since that's the individual user I mapped it. Is that, she still has a music folder here, if you notice that. We didn't delete her music folder, but now when we go into that music folder, it's completely empty in that primary drive location. So what we're actually going to do is that we come back over here and again look in the W drive, just to confirm the way things are set up here. We can look into the K Callaway. We have that same music folder, only that music folder, and you see all of her files. But now when she comes in to her map drive location, in this case the H drive, she sees things that she would expect. She sees all of her folders. She sees this music folder that exists, and when she opens it up, she now sees those MP3 files. Even though physically, and again, if you want to see this path here, if you trust me on this here, is that we mapped the drive in this case to that London user's home. So this is the L drive we mapped it to, and the share associated with that particular location. But she's seeing content from that W drive of which she doesn't have a mapping to. So again, it's concatenating that information together and allowing her to be able to take best advantage of that. Now, in the essence of time, I know we're running short here at the moment, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to conclude this portion of the demonstration here. The last little piece of the presentation was talking about how you can use all three of these products together, that you can actually use the Novell Storage Manager to provision content into your organization so that you minimize the overhead to your IT organization. You can use dynamic file services to make sure you optimize the usage of your storage resources and putting only relevant content in relevant locations on your storage resources. Our reporter can be used for interrogating and understanding your network resources so that you can determine how you need to provide better policies and management of that storage resources. And then finally, you can use those findings from the Novell File Reporter to be able to automate and Novell Storage Manager to continue to grow and change as the organization changes and applying the different business policies in effect. So the last little piece is the fact, that we believe, that the Novell File Management Suite offers a lot of value to many organizations, specifically through its identity aspect, that we now tie information back to the user storage back to the identity of the individual user. The one aspect we didn't discuss is that we know, especially with storage managers, we can have exemption policies. We talk about deleting multimedia files as a general rule, but maybe we exempt out our marketing department because marketing creates multimedia content as part of the job function. So we're able to go through and make certain that because you're a part of a specific portion of the organization, you're exempt from those rules of harvesting multimedia files from your home directory. So great example of this identity aspect. We also believe that our suite of tools are in addition to any other storage management tools you might have from any hardware storage vendor. Many different storage management vendors provide tools to manage their resources, but oftentimes their scope is only to the physical device of which you're connected to and interacting with. In the case of an enterprise organization who may have multiple storage locations, even geographically dispersed, Novell File Reporter and Novell Storage Manager can manage all of those resources from a single console with a single set of policies. We're completely agnostic to any hardware vendor or operating system platform. So with that, I will conclude, and we'll turn back over to the WebEx session to see if there are any other questions. I didn't lose anyone, did I?
Oh, we're still here.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. Stop sharing. I'm having an issue trying to find my WebEx console here so that I can kill the sharing process. Here it is. Okay, so we're back here. So looking if there's any additional questions that may come up.
I think there were just some questions about eDirectory in there, if you see in the Q&A.
And I do apologize. Again, the reason, and it does work with eDirectory, especially if any customers are using Novell eDirectory, so I'm very sure this product does work with Novell eDirectory. In fact, it was created and initially architected exclusively around eDirectory. In many cases, from a Novell organization, it's actually in some cases more important to show it working in a cross-platform environment so that we could actually show, and again, in this particular example, again, it was a single server, no e-directory, no Novell tools other than the management consoles for the particular products that are in place. So it's very important to understand that this product can work. It's also the licensing for this particular product is directory agnostic. So if you have a mixed organization of which you have Novell file servers using e-directory and Microsoft storage resources, whether they actually be an actual Microsoft server or a network attached storage emulating a Microsoft server, and that you can actually manage both of them with a single set of licenses. So you have 5,000 users in your organization, you buy a 5,000 user license account. We don't care where their storage is. We don't care if it's on a Novell environment or a Microsoft environment from the management perspective from Storage Manager or File Reporter. You can use that across the entire organization so that you can have consistent policies, consistent management tools available for your organization. And again, if anyone has obviously the Novell file servers in play and want to see the actual demonstration using the Novell resources, everything I showed you is identical with the aspect of the actual platform-specific management tool. So rather than using the Microsoft Management Console, I would have been using either Console 1 or iManager to perform those operations. But everything else is identical. If you're using File Reporter, you won't have any differences whatsoever in the way in which you interact with things. The only difference in Storage Manager is the specific aspect of the directory. We have the Novell permission set and the trustees and file attributes rather than the Microsoft attributes. And again, everything else is the exact same way, the quota management, so every single aspect is as close as possible being identical and unique across the two platforms.
Perfect.
So with that, if there's any other questions,